The alarm on my wrist device did not blink. It screamed. I sat up so fast that I hit my head on the low shelf above my bunk, and for a moment I just held my skull and breathed through the pain, because pain was easier to understand than the message glowing red in front of me. Report to Docking Bay 4. Immediate. You have been selected. Selected for what? I did not know. I was Ethan Cole, a junior translator on a human outpost station called Meridian Reach, and nobody selected junior translators for anything important. We filed reports. We sat in the back of meetings. We fixed small mistakes in big documents that senior diplomats did not have time to fix themselves. That was my whole life, and I had made peace with it. I threw on my uniform, still buttoning the collar as I ran down the narrow corridor, and I could hear my own heartbeat louder than my footsteps. Meridian Reach was not a large station. Word traveled fast here, and by the time I reached the bay, a crowd of officers had already gathered near the viewing window, all of them looking out at something that made their faces pale. I pushed through and looked. Outside, filling half the starfield, was a ship unlike anything I had studied in 3 years of alien contact training. It was shaped like a curved shell, dark red and gold, with ridges running along its surface, like the segments of an insect. It did not look built, it looked grown, and it was enormous, large enough to swallow our entire station without slowing down. That, said a voice behind me, belongs to the Korath Dominion. I turned and saw Margaret Lowe, our senior ambassador, a tall woman with gray hair pulled back tightly and eyes that never seemed to blink first in any conversation. She was staring at the ship the way a person stares at a storm they cannot outrun. The Korath, I repeated. My throat felt dry. Every trainee in the diplomatic corps knew the name. The Korath Dominion was one of the oldest empires in known space, a hive society ruled by a single queen whose word was absolute law across 100 worlds. They did not make alliances easily. They did not forgive insults easily either. Stories said that entire fleets had been destroyed for offenses as small as a wrong gesture during a formal greeting. Their queen is requesting an audience, Margaret said. Today, in 3 hours. With who? Margaret turned to look at me, and something in her expression made my stomach drop before she even said the words. With you. I laughed, because I thought it was some kind of mistake, some kind of test. Nobody laughed back. The silence in that bay was heavier than the ship outside the window. There has to be an error, I said. I am not qualified for a first audience with a sovereign ruler. Send someone senior. Send you. I offered, Margaret said quietly. Their message named you specifically. Ethan Cole. They used your full name and your service number. I do not know how they have that information, and I do not like not knowing. A cold feeling spread through my chest. If an empire that could crush our station in a single strike knew my name before I had ever spoken to them, then something about this meeting was not a simple diplomatic courtesy. It was something else, something they had already decided. 3 hours. That was all the time I had to prepare for a meeting that could decide whether humanity gained a powerful new alliance or made an enemy strong enough to erase entire star systems. I was taken to a briefing room where 2 intelligence officers threw information at me faster than I could absorb it. The Korath had encountered 11 other species since their empire began recording history. 9 of those species had eventually become tributary states, offering resources and loyalty to the Dominion in exchange for protection. 2 had refused. Neither of those 2 species existed anymore, not as independent powers. Nobody in the room said the word extinct, but everybody was thinking it. Their culture is built around hierarchy and tribute, one officer explained, sliding images across the table. Every image showed the same thing, a Korath ambassador presenting some object to a hooded, seated figure while dozens of others watched in silence. Every formal audience with a new species begins the same way. The visitor presents a gift. It does not need to be valuable in material terms, but it needs to show respect, restraint, and understanding of their customs. Historical records suggest the Queen judges a species character based on this single exchange. So the first thing I do, I said slowly, decides how they see all of humanity. Essentially, yes. I felt the weight of that settle onto my shoulders like a physical thing. I was 26 years old. I translated documents for a living. I had never met a foreign head of state, let alone the ruler of an empire capable of ending my entire species with a single fleet order. "What do we give her?" I asked. The officers exchanged a look I did not like. "That is the problem," the first one said. "We have less than 3 hours, and nothing in our stores qualifies as impressive tribute by Korath standards. Our best mineral samples are common knowledge to them already. Our most advanced technology would take weeks to prepare a demonstration model. We have nothing that would not look small next to what other species have historically offered." "Then we are already losing," I said. Nobody argued with me. I left the briefing room with my mind spinning through every object on the station, trying to imagine something, anything, that could stand as an offering worthy of an empire. Weapons were forbidden under station charter. Advanced tools required export permits we did not have time to process. Even our best communication equipment would look primitive to a species that had crossed interstellar space for longer than human civilization had existed. I walked past the observation deck on my way back to my quarters, and through the reinforced glass, I saw the Korath ship again, closer now, its ridged hull catching the light of our sun in strange colors. Something about it made me stop. It did not look aggressive. It looked patient, the way a predator looks patient when it already knows the outcome of a hunt. A young officer named Priya Malhotra caught up to me in the corridor, her tablet full of notes she had gathered on Korath etiquette in the short time available. She was efficient and calm, one of the few people who did not seem to be panicking, and I was grateful for that. "There is something you should know before you go in," she said, keeping pace beside me. "The Korath consider silence a sign of respect. Do not speak unless spoken to first. Do not offer your hand or any physical gesture unless the Queen initiates it. And whatever you present it with both hands, lowered, never raised toward her. Anything else?" "One more thing." Priya hesitated. "Historical logs suggest the Queen has never shown visible emotion during any recorded first contact, not with any of the 11 species. She listens, she watches, and then she decides. Some scholars believe emotional expression has been bred out of the Korath ruling line entirely, generations ago, to keep judgment cold and fair." I thought about that as I reached my quarters and closed the door behind me, the small metal room suddenly feeling smaller than ever. A ruler who had never shown emotion in the presence of any other species, in an empire old enough to have swallowed 2 civilizations whole, was waiting to meet me in less than 2 hours, and I had nothing worthy to bring her. I opened the single drawer beside my bunk, the one place on this entire station that held anything personal to me, searching for an idea I did not yet have. My hands moved through old data chips, a worn photograph of my parents standing outside our house on Earth, a spare uniform patch, and finally, at the very back, something small and wooden that I had almost forgotten was there. I picked it up and held it in my palm, turning it slowly in the dim light of my quarters, and for the first time since the alarm had woken me, I stopped feeling only fear. I felt something else too, something uncertain and strange, the beginning of an idea I was not sure I had the courage to follow through with. Outside my door, the countdown to the audience continued, and somewhere far above the station, an ancient empire waited to see what humanity would choose to offer. The object in my hand was a small carved bird, no longer than my thumb, its wings folded close to its body as if caught in the middle of landing. My grandfather had carved it from a fallen branch when I was 6 years old, sitting on our back porch on a summer evening while my mother called us in for dinner. He had pressed it into my palm and told me that every bird knows the way home, even when it cannot see it, and that as long as I kept this one close, I would always find my way back too. I had carried it with me through flight school, through my first posting, through 3 years on Meridian Reach, and I had never once thought of it as anything more than a private comfort. Now I sat on the edge of my bunk, turning it over in my fingers, and the idea forming in my mind felt almost foolish enough to laugh at. Bring this to the queen of an ancient star empire. It weighed nothing. It was worth nothing, not in credits, not in resources, not in any measure that mattered to people who traded in fleets and star systems. Compared to whatever tribute the other 10 known species had offered across generations of contact, a hand-carved wooden bird would look like an insult, a joke, or worse, a sign that humanity did not take this meeting seriously at all. I put it back in the drawer and closed it, and I told myself to think of something else, something proper, something that would not get an entire species marked as reckless and small-minded on its very first day of contact with a power capable of erasing us. There was a knock on my door before I could decide anything, and Margaret Lowe stepped inside without waiting for an answer, her face tight with the particular kind of stress that senior officials only showed when they were completely out of solutions. "We have a problem," she said. "Only one?" She did not smile. "The council reviewed every item in our stores that could function as tribute. Nothing qualifies. Our rarest alloys are already known to the Korath through prior trade routes with neighboring systems. Our best technology demonstrations require testing environments we cannot recreate on short notice, and presenting anything untested risks catastrophic embarrassment if it fails in front of the Queen. So we have nothing. We have less than nothing," Margaret said. "Command is considering sending you in with a formal written apology instead, explaining that humanity was unprepared for the customs of this meeting and requesting a delay to prepare something appropriate." The idea sent a spike of alarm through me. You cannot be serious. Delaying a queen who summoned this meeting herself, on her own timeline, might look far worse than showing up with something modest. It could look like weakness, or worse, like disrespect. "I know," Margaret said, rubbing her temples. "I have said the same thing to Command for the last 20 minutes. Nobody has a better answer." I almost told her about the bird then. I almost opened my mouth and let the words out, but something stopped me, some old habit of doubting my own instincts in front of people whose careers depended on getting decisions like this exactly right. Instead, I told her I needed a few more minutes to think, and she left, promising to return before we were escorted to the meeting point. Alone again, I opened the drawer and looked at the carved bird once more. I thought about every briefing I had ever attended on interspecies contact, every lecture about how power respected power, how weakness invited aggression, how the strong only trusted the strong. Every lesson pointed toward bringing something grand, something that spoke of human capability and strength. But there was another thought sitting quietly underneath all of that, one that had been forming since Priya told me the Queen had never shown emotion in any recorded meeting with any of the 11 species that came before us. If an empire had spent generations meeting other civilizations, receiving tribute after tribute of gold, weapons, technology, and resources, then perhaps the Queen had already seen every version of impressive that existed in the galaxy. Perhaps grandeur was not rare to her at all. Perhaps it was the only thing she had ever been offered, over and over, until it meant nothing. What she had likely never been offered, not once in all those generations of formal contact, was something small, personal, and true. I did not know if that thought was wisdom or desperation dressed up to look like wisdom. I only knew that I had less than 2 hours left and no better option in front of me. There was a second knock at my door, softer this time, and when I opened it, I found Colin Pierce standing there, another junior officer from the diplomatic wing, someone I had worked alongside for over a year without ever becoming close friends. He had a reputation for saying exactly what he thought, whether people wanted to hear it or not. "Word is you still have not chosen a gift," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, the same habit Margaret had. "Word travels fast. The whole station is talking about it. People are placing wagers on what you will bring. Some say a data archive of human history. Some say a piece of art from an important museum. One officer in supply actually suggested giving them our entire star chart database, which is either brilliant or the worst idea anyone has ever had. What do you think I should bring?" Colin studied me for a moment, his eyes falling to the drawer still open beside my bunk, to the small wooden shape resting inside it. "Is that it?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual to something closer to disbelief. "Is that what you are considering?" I closed the drawer instinctively, embarrassed before I had even fully decided anything. I do not know what I am considering. I have less than 2 hours and nothing that matches what an empire like this deserves. Ethan, listen to me. Colin sat down across from me, his usual joking manner gone entirely. I do not say this to discourage you. I say it because I care about what happens to you, and to everyone on this station. If you walk into that meeting holding a child's toy while an ancient empire watches, and if this queen decides that gesture means humanity does not respect her power, the consequences will not fall only on you. They will fall on all of us. I know, I said quietly. Then bring something else. Bring anything else. There has to be something. There is nothing else, I said, and for the first time since the alarm had woken me, my voice came out steady instead of afraid. Every officer in that briefing room told me the same thing. We have no tribute that would not look small compared to what other species have offered across generations. If that is true, then the size of the gift was never going to save us anyway. The only thing left that might actually matter is whether it is honest. Colin stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something in his expression shift from frustration to a kind of tired resignation. "It is your name on the message," he finally said, "your choice to make. I hope you are right, because if you are wrong, there may not be a second chance to fix it." He left without another word, and I sat alone in my quarters with the drawer still closed in front of me, the countdown continuing somewhere in the back of my mind, each minute passing whether I was ready or not. When Margaret returned 20 minutes later to escort me to the transport that would carry me to the Korath ship, she found me standing by the door, already dressed in my formal uniform, the small wooden bird held carefully in my closed hand. "Is that your gift?" she asked, and I could see she already suspected the answer before I gave it. "Yes." She did not argue. She did not tell me to reconsider. She only looked at the small carved shape resting in my palm for a long moment, and then she looked back up at my face, searching for something, perhaps trying to decide whether I had lost my nerve or found a strange kind of courage. "Command wanted you to bring something impressive," she said quietly, "something that would make them see our strength." "I know. I am not going to stop you," she said, "but I want you to understand what is at stake if this goes wrong. Every life on this station, and possibly every human life in this sector, depends on how the next hour unfolds." "I understand," I said, and my hand tightened around the small wooden bird, its familiar shape pressing into my palm like it had 1,000 times before, back when the only thing it needed to guide me home was a summer evening on a porch far away from any of this. We walked together toward the transport bay in silence, and above us, through every window we passed, the vast curved hull of the Korath ship grew larger and larger, patient and waiting, ready to receive whatever humanity chose to offer. The transport ride across the gap between our station and the Korath vessel took 11 minutes, though it felt far longer. I sat strapped into a narrow seat with Margaret across from me, and 2 security escorts flanking the door, none of us speaking, all of us watching through the small viewport as the massive red and gold hull filled more and more of the darkness outside. Up close, the ship did not look like metal at all. It looked like something living, its surface marked with patterns that shifted subtly as we approached, almost like breathing. A section of the hull opened without any visible seam, revealing a landing bay lit in soft amber light, and our pilot guided the transport inside with careful precision, as if he too understood that a single mistake here could mean far more than an embarrassing report back home. When the transport doors opened, the air that greeted us was warmer than I expected, carrying a faint scent like burnt sugar and something mineral underneath it. 2 tall figures stood waiting for us on the landing platform, their bodies covered in smooth dark plating that caught the amber light in shifting colors, their limbs longer and more angular than a human's, moving with a fluid precision that made them look almost like they were gliding rather than walking. Neither of them spoke to us directly. One of them simply turned and began walking deeper into the ship, and the message was clear enough without words. We were meant to follow. The corridors we passed through were vast, curved like the inside of a shell, lined with soft glowing patterns that pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat running through the walls themselves. Occasionally, we passed smaller Korath workers moving with quiet purpose through side passages, none of them pausing to look at us, all of them focused entirely on whatever tasks their empire required of them. "Remember what Priya told you," Margaret whispered as we walked. "Silence until spoken to. Both hands lowered when you present anything. No sudden movements." I nodded, my throat too tight to answer with words. My hand closed tightly around the small carved bird hidden inside my jacket pocket. The corridor opened finally into a massive chamber, unlike anything I had ever seen, and I felt my steps slow despite myself, the sheer scale of it pressing down on me like a physical weight. The ceiling arched high overhead, easily the height of a 10-story building, and the walls curved inward toward a raised platform at the far end of the room, where a single figure sat upon a throne, carved from something that looked like dark amber crystal. Rows of other figures stood along both sides of the chamber, and my stomach tightened when I realized they were not all Korath. I recognized the scaled ridges of a Drevank's ambassador near the front, and further back, the faceted crystalline form of an Osseran delegate, its body catching the light in fractured colors. Other species I did not recognize at all stood among them, dozens of representatives from across known space, all gathered here, all watching in absolute silence as we walked the long path toward the throne. Every one of them had presumably already presented their own tribute to the Queen before our arrival, and looking at the arrangement of gifts displayed on pedestals along the chamber walls, I understood immediately just how far outmatched we were. A pedestal near the front held what looked like a sculpture made of pure crystallized light, shifting colors as it rotated slowly on its own axis. Another held a weapon, so intricately designed that even standing motionless, it seemed to hum with barely restrained power. Further along, a floating orb pulsed with soft blue energy, clearly some kind of advanced technology far beyond anything humanity currently possessed. I felt Colin's warning echo in my mind with every step. A child's toy, next to gifts like these. The Queen herself sat motionless upon her throne, and even from a distance I could feel the weight of her presence, something that had nothing to do with size or physical strength, and everything to do with the absolute stillness of her posture, the sense that she had been sitting exactly like this for longer than my entire species had existed. Her plating was darker than the guards who had escorted us, almost black, edged with deep gold lines that traced patterns across her shoulders and down her arms. Her eyes, when I finally dared to look at them directly, were a deep amber color, and they were already fixed on me, studying me with an intensity that made every instinct in my body want to look away. She did not blink, she did not move, she simply watched. Margaret and I stopped at the required distance from the throne, exactly as Priya had instructed, and we lowered our heads in the careful, measured bow that our briefing had described. When I straightened again, the Queen had still not moved, her amber eyes still fixed on me rather than Margaret, as if she already understood that I was the one who mattered for whatever came next. A translator device embedded somewhere within the throne's structure activated with a soft chime, and a voice emerged, layered and strange, clearly not the Queen's natural voice but some artificial rendering of it into words we could understand. "You are the one called Ethan Cole." It was not a question. My name, spoken in that strange layered voice inside that vast chamber, in front of dozens of representatives from across the galaxy, made my pulse hammer against my ribs. "I am," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted it to, in that enormous space. "You know why you were summoned specifically?" "I do not, Your Majesty," I admitted, deciding honesty was safer than pretending to knowledge I did not have. "I was told only that you requested this audience, and that I had been named." For a long moment the Queen said nothing, and the silence stretched out until it felt like its own physical presence in the room. Then her amber eyes shifted slightly, and I realized she was looking past me now, toward the empty space beside my feet, where, according to the customs Priya had described, I was meant to have already placed my gift. "Every visitor who stands before this throne," the layered voice finally continued, "offers tribute befitting the strength of their people. Your predecessors from other worlds understood this without instruction. I am curious whether your species does as well." I felt every eye in that chamber turn toward me at once, and somewhere behind me I heard the faint shift of Margaret's breathing, tense and controlled, waiting to see what I would do. This was the moment. There was no more time to reconsider, no briefing left to consult, no senior officer left to ask for guidance. I reached into my jacket pocket and closed my fingers around the small carved bird, feeling its familiar shape press against my palm one final time before I would have to let it go. I stepped forward, exactly the number of paces Priya had specified, and lowered myself into the careful kneeling position our briefing required, both hands extended forward and low, the small wooden bird resting in my open palms for the entire chamber to see. A murmur passed through the gathered ambassadors, quiet but unmistakable, and I did not need to understand every language in that room to recognize disbelief when I heard it. The Queen's amber eyes moved down from my face to the small object resting in my hands, and for the first time since we had entered that chamber, something in her posture changed. It was subtle, almost too small to notice, but I saw it. Her shoulders, which had remained perfectly still throughout the entire audience, shifted forward slightly, as if she were leaning toward something she had not expected to see. Nobody in the chamber spoke. Nobody moved. Even the guards along the walls seemed to hold themselves more rigidly than before, as if sensing that something unusual was happening in front of them. "Approach," the layered voice said, quieter now than it had been before, and I felt my heart pound harder with every step as I rose and walked the remaining distance toward the base of the throne, my hands still extended, the small carved bird still resting in my palms, waiting to see what an ancient queen, who had never shown emotion to any visiting species in recorded history, would do when she finally understood what I had chosen to give her. The queen leaned forward on her throne, and the movement alone sent a fresh wave of tension through the chamber, because according to everything Priya had told me, according to every historical record our intelligence officers had gathered, this queen did not lean forward for anyone. She observed from stillness. She judged from distance. Yet here she was, closing the space between herself and the small wooden bird, resting in my open palms, her amber eyes fixed on it with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thinner. "Where did this come from?" the layered voice asked, and for the first time I noticed something different in its tone, a slight unevenness that had not been present before. "My grandfather carved it," I said carefully, remembering to keep my voice steady even though my pulse was hammering hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. "When I was a child, it has traveled with me ever since, through every posting, every mission, every place I have called home since then." "It has no value," a voice interrupted from somewhere along the side of the chamber, sharp and clearly meant to be heard by everyone present. I turned slightly and saw a Korath advisor stepping forward from the ranks near the throne, his plating a duller shade than the Queen's, his posture rigid with what I recognized immediately as disapproval. "Forgive my interruption, Sovereign, but this offering insults the tradition of this chamber. Every species before this one understood the weight of tribute. This human brings a carved scrap of wood." I felt the muscles in my legs tense, ready to be ordered out, ready for this entire meeting to collapse into the disaster everyone back on the station had feared. Margaret shifted slightly behind me, and I could feel her holding herself back from stepping forward to intervene, trusting that any sudden movement now would only make things worse. The Queen did not look away from the bird in my hands. She did not respond immediately to her advisor either, and the silence that followed stretched long enough that I began to wonder if she had even heard him at all. "Kaelor," she finally said, and her voice carried a weight that made the advisor go still immediately. "Tell me what value gold has, when I have received 1,000 offerings of gold across 1,000 years of rule." The advisor named Kaelor did not answer. "Tell me what value weapons have," she continued, "when my armories already contain enough destruction to end every civilization in this chamber twice over. Tell me what value crystal light sculptures have, when I have seen every variation of beauty this galaxy can produce, presented to me again and again by species eager to impress me with what I have already seen 100 times before. Kaelor lowered his head slightly, and I understood then that whatever authority the queen held in this chamber, it was absolute enough that even her closest advisors did not dare argue once she had made her position clear. She turned her attention back to me, and slowly, carefully, she extended one long armored hand toward the bird resting in my palms. I did not move. I did not breathe. Priya's warning echoed through my mind. No sudden movements, no gestures unless she initiates them, and this, clearly, was the queen initiating something none of our briefings had prepared me for. Her fingers, longer and more articulated than a human hand, closed gently around the small wooden shape, lifting it carefully from my palms as if it might shatter under too much pressure. She held it up before her own eyes, turning it slowly, studying the curve of its folded wings, the small details my grandfather had carved into it so many years ago on a porch far away from this chamber, this empire, this entire section of the galaxy. "This creature," she said softly, and the layered translation could not fully hide the strange quality entering her voice now, something none of us had words for yet. "What is it called, in your language?" "A bird," I said, "a small flying creature, common on our world. This one represents no species in particular, only the shape my grandfather remembered from his own childhood." "Flying," the queen repeated, and something in the way she said the word made the entire chamber grow even quieter than before, if that was possible. "Your species still remembers what flight feels like." I did not understand the significance of her question, not yet, but I saw something shift across the faces of the Korath guards standing along the walls, the ones whose expressions I had assumed were unreadable, simply because I did not know their culture well enough to interpret them. Now, watching closely, I saw something that looked unmistakably like discomfort passing between them. Quick glances exchanged, postures growing stiffer. "Sovereign," Kaelor said again, his voice quieter this time, almost pleading. "Perhaps this audience should continue in private council." "No," the queen said, and the single word carried enough force that Kaelor immediately fell silent again. She continued turning the small carved bird in her fingers, studying it from every angle, and when she finally looked up, her amber eyes were fixed on me with an expression that no historical record, no briefing, no intelligence officer back on Meridian Reach could have prepared me to witness. "My people were not always what you see standing in this chamber today," she said slowly, and I realized with a jolt that she was speaking not just to me now, but to every ambassador present, to every representative from every empire gathered to witness this audience. Long before the Dominion existed, before the hive structure that now governs every aspect of our lives, my ancestors possessed wings. We flew across the skies of our homeworld the way this small carved creature suggests your kind still does. A murmur passed through the assembled crowd, quieter this time, more uncertain, as if nobody quite knew how to respond to a queen revealing something so personal in front of representatives from a dozen different empires. "Our wings were lost across countless generations," she continued, her voice growing steadier even as the words themselves grew heavier, "sacrificed for efficiency, for the strength of the hive, for the singular purpose that has allowed the Korath Dominion to endure and expand across 100 worlds while lesser empires rose and fell around us. We traded flight for permanence. We traded the sky for the ground. And in the 1,000 years since that transformation was completed, no visitor to this chamber, no tribute offered by any species across every audience I have held, has ever reminded me of what was given up to build what stands here today." She looked down at the small wooden bird still resting in her palm, and her fingers curled slightly around it, holding it the way I remembered holding it myself as a child, the way my grandfather had held it before pressing it into my hands. "Until now," she finished quietly, "I did not know what to say. I do not think anyone in that chamber knew what to say." The silence stretched on, heavy and strange, until finally the queen raised her head again, and for the first time in this entire audience, I saw something glisten faintly along the edge of her amber eyes, something that in a human would have been unmistakable, and even here, even in a species whose emotional expressions I had never studied, I understood exactly what I was witnessing. Tears. The chamber around us seemed to hold its breath entirely. I glanced sideways and saw the Drevank's ambassador shifting uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to witnessing anything resembling vulnerability from a ruler as powerful as this one. The Ossuran delegate's crystalline form had gone almost completely still, its faceted surface reflecting the amber light of the throne room in fractured, uncertain patterns. "In 1,000 years," the Queen said, her voice quieter now, almost fragile in a way that felt entirely wrong for a ruler who commanded fleets capable of ending civilizations. "I have received tribute meant to impress me, tribute meant to intimidate me, tribute meant to purchase favor, or alliance, or protection. Every gift presented in this chamber has been calculated, weighed, designed for effect. Not once, in all that time, has anyone brought me something simply because it was true." She looked at me directly then, and I felt the full weight of that gaze settle over me, not threatening now, but searching, as if she were trying to understand something about my entire species through the shape of a single object, carved by a grandfather I had never expected to matter this much to the fate of a galaxy. "Tell me, Ethan Cole," she said, "why you chose to bring this, when your own advisors surely warned you that it might be seen as an insult." I thought carefully before answering, aware that every word I spoke now might shape not just my own fate, but the fate of every human across every world we had ever settled. "Because I had nothing else that felt honest," I said finally. "Every other option available to me was calculated too, Your Majesty, meant to impress you the way you just described. I did not believe humanity could compete with empires who have had generations longer than us to build wonders. But I believed, or at least I hoped, that there might be value in bringing something real instead of something impressive, something that meant nothing to anyone but me, and yet somehow meant everything." The Queen was quiet for a long moment, still holding the small carved bird in her palm, her amber eyes moving between the object and my face, as if measuring the truth of my words against something only she could see. "You gambled the fate of your entire species," she finally said, "on the hope that sincerity would matter more than strength." "I did not think of it as a gamble," I admitted. "I did not have time to think of it as anything except the only choice that felt right." Something shifted in her expression then, something I would spend the rest of my life trying to properly describe, because no single human word felt adequate to capture it. It was not quite a smile, not quite relief, not quite recognition, but some combination of all three, settling across features that had remained utterly unreadable to every previous visitor in 1,000 years of recorded history. "Then perhaps," the Queen said, rising slowly from her throne for the first time since we had entered the chamber, the small wooden bird still cradled carefully in her hand, "your species understands something that every other empire in this room has long since forgotten." The Queen stood at her full height for the first time since our arrival, and the chamber seemed to shift around her, every ambassador present straightening, every guard along the walls snapping to attention, as if her rising alone carried enough significance to demand immediate response from everyone present. She held the small carved bird against her chest with one hand, almost protectively, and looked out across the gathered representatives of a dozen empires, with an expression none of them had ever seen on her before. "I have sat upon this throne for longer than any ruler currently living among the assembled powers of this chamber," she said, her voice carrying clearly now, steady despite the emotion I had witnessed only moments earlier. "In that time, I have received tribute from 11 species before this one. 9 chose wisely and became valued partners of this dominion. 2 chose poorly, believing strength alone determined worth, and their fates are recorded in the histories every one of you already knows." She paused, and her amber eyes swept across the chamber, settling briefly on the Drevank's ambassador, then the Ossuran delegate, then each of the other representatives in turn, before returning finally to me. "Today, a species barely known to this galaxy, newly arrived among the powers gathered here, brought me something none of you thought to offer across all the tribute exchanged in this chamber throughout my reign." Kalor, the advisor who had spoken against my gift earlier, stood rigid near the base of the throne, his expression carefully controlled, though I could see something working behind his eyes, some private reassessment taking place that I suspected would shape his counsel to the Queen for years to come. Humanity did not bring me strength, the Queen continued. They did not bring me wealth, or weapons, or wonders crafted to overwhelm. They brought me a memory, a small, simple, honest memory, offered without calculation, without the careful weighing of political advantage that has defined every other audience held within these walls. She looked down again at the small wooden bird resting in her palm, and I watched her thumb trace gently along the curve of its folded wings, the same gesture I had made 1,000 times myself over the years, without ever imagining it would matter to anyone beyond myself. "I have decided," she said, and the chamber grew utterly silent in anticipation of whatever judgment was about to follow, "that the Korath Dominion will extend to humanity a formal offer of alliance, granting your species protected status among the powers gathered here today." A ripple of shock passed through the assembled ambassadors, quiet murmurs rising from several delegations at once. Protected status was not something the Dominion offered lightly, and from what little I understood of the political weight carried by such words, it placed humanity immediately among the recognized powers of this region of space, rather than among the vulnerable, unprotected species who existed at the mercy of stronger empires. "Sovereign," Kaelor said carefully, stepping forward once more, though his tone now carried none of the sharp disapproval from earlier, only genuine surprise. "Such an offer typically requires extended negotiation, formal treaties, demonstrations of mutual benefit, spanning multiple audiences across many cycles." "I am aware of the customary process," the Queen said, and something almost like humor touched the edge of her voice now, faint but unmistakable. "I am also the one who determines when that process may be expedited. Humanity has already demonstrated something more valuable than any negotiated benefit could provide. They have shown me honesty, in a chamber where honesty has been absent for longer than most species currently present have existed." She turned back toward me, and I realized with a start that Margaret had stepped forward slightly beside me, her expression a careful mask of professional composure that could not fully hide the shock beneath it. This was not the outcome anyone on Meridian Reach had prepared for. This was not even an outcome our most optimistic officers had dared to hope for. "Ethan Cole," the Queen said, and hearing my name spoken in that layered voice for a second time felt entirely different now than it had at the beginning of this audience, when I had feared it meant danger rather than opportunity. "You will remain aboard this vessel as a guest of honor while the formal terms of this alliance are drafted. Your ambassador may return to your station to inform your leadership of what has occurred here today." I glanced at Margaret, unsure whether this arrangement was something I should question, but her small nod told me everything I needed to know. This was not a demand to be refused. This was an honor, rare and unprecedented, and refusing it now would undo everything the last hour had accomplished. "I am honored, Your Majesty," I said, bowing my head slightly, remembering even now, in the midst of everything that had just happened, to maintain the careful respect our briefing had described. The Queen's expression shifted again, something almost gentle passing across her features before the familiar composure returned, tempered now by whatever private transformation had taken place within her during this audience. "You may call me Visara," she said quietly, quiet enough that I suspected only those closest to the throne could hear it clearly. "In private conversation, not before this assembly, but between us, when the matters we discuss are personal rather than political." I did not fully understand the significance of that offer in the moment, but I would come to learn, over the following days aboard the Korath vessel, that no ruler of the Dominion had extended such familiarity to any outsider in recorded memory. It was, Kaelor would later admit to me with obvious reluctance, an honor that placed me in a category no historical record had ever needed to describe before. The audience concluded shortly after, the assembled ambassadors dispersing in clusters of quiet, urgent conversation, clearly attempting to process what they had just witnessed. Margaret pulled me aside briefly before her own departure back to Meridian Reach, her expression somewhere between relief and disbelief. "I do not know how you knew this would work," she said quietly, gripping my shoulder with a firmness that told me exactly how frightened she had been throughout the entire audience. "I did not know," I admitted. "I only knew I did not have anything else to offer." "Whatever instinct guided you," she said, "it just changed the future of our entire species. I hope you understand that." I did not fully understand it. Not yet. Not in that moment, standing in the vast chamber with the weight of everything that had just occurred still settling over me. But over the following days, as I remained aboard the Korath vessel and came to know Visara in conversations far removed from the formality of her throne room, I began to understand exactly what had happened and exactly why it mattered so much more than any of us had initially realized. Visara told me, during one of our private conversations in a garden chamber deep within the ship, filled with strange luminous plants that glowed faintly in shades of blue and violet, that the loss of flight among her people had never been openly discussed in any formal setting throughout the entire history of the Dominion. It was considered a closed subject, a wound from ancient history that the hive structure had decided long ago was best left unexamined, lest it create doubt about the wisdom of the transformation that had built their current empire. "Every ruler before me carried this same private grief," she told me, sitting across from me on a low bench carved from the same amber crystal as her throne, the small wooden bird resting on the small table between us where she had placed it after our audience concluded. None of us were permitted to speak of it, not even to our closest advisors, because the hive required unity above all else, and unity could not tolerate the suggestion that our ancestors' choice had cost us something irreplaceable. "Then why speak of it now?" I asked, in front of every ambassador present, from every empire gathered in that chamber. She considered the question carefully before answering, her amber eyes drifting toward the small bird resting between us. "Because you reminded me," she said, "that honesty carries a strength calculated tribute never could. If I continued hiding what your gift revealed within me, I would have proven that my people still fear the truth of our own history more than we value connection with those who might understand it." I decided, in that moment, that I was tired of ruling from behind that particular silence. Word of the alliance spread quickly across known space in the days that followed, and I learned through updates relayed from Meridian Reach that other empires were reacting with a mixture of confusion and cautious reassessment. Species who had spent generations building tribute strategies designed to impress the Korath Dominion now found themselves studying humanity's approach instead, trying to understand how a civilization so young, so recently arrived among the stars, had achieved something none of them had managed across centuries of careful diplomatic maneuvering. Kalor, who had initially opposed my gift so forcefully in the throne room, sought me out on the third day of my stay aboard the vessel, finding me in the same garden chamber where Visara and I had spoken previously. He stood stiffly for a long moment before speaking, and I could see the effort it cost him to say what came next. "I misjudged your species," he said. "I believed strength alone determined the worth of an alliance. I have served this throne long enough to have grown certain of many things I am now forced to reconsider." "You were only trying to protect your queen," I said. "I do not fault you for that." "Perhaps," he said, "but protecting her from insult is not the same as protecting her from truth. I confused the two, and I nearly cost the Dominion something valuable in the process." He paused, studying me with an expression that had softened considerably since our first encounter in the throne room. "The Queen has not spoken so freely in front of an assembly in all the years I have served her. Whatever your species brings to this alliance beyond the small carved creature you offered, I suspect it will prove more valuable than any tribute my people have received in generations." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing, and Kalor eventually excused himself, leaving me alone again in the quiet garden chamber, surrounded by luminous plants, glowing softly in colors no flower on Earth had ever produced. Over the following weeks, formal terms of alliance were drafted between the Korath Dominion and the Human Diplomatic Corps, granting our small, scattered collection of colonies and stations something we had never possessed before: real protection under the authority of one of the oldest and most powerful empires in known space. Trade agreements followed shortly after, technology exchanges that would have taken decades to negotiate through normal channels moving forward, instead in a matter of months, all because a single audience in a vast throne room had unfolded in a way nobody had predicted. I returned to Meridian Reach eventually, though I would travel back to the Korath homeworld many times in the years that followed, serving as one of the primary liaisons between our two civilizations, a role I never could have imagined for myself back when I was simply a junior translator filing reports nobody read. Margaret told me once, sitting across from me in the same briefing room where this entire journey had begun, that command still could not fully explain, in official reports, exactly why the audience had succeeded the way it did. Every analysis, every retrospective study conducted by our diplomatic corps kept returning to the same conclusion, one that felt almost too simple to include in a formal document. Sincerity had succeeded where strategy could not. I still keep the memory of that small carved bird close, even though it now rests in Visara's private chambers rather than my own pocket, a gift given freely and never once regretted, despite every fear that had gripped me in the hours before that audience began. My grandfather told me once that every bird knows the way home, even when it cannot see it clearly, and I have come to believe that something similar is true of honesty itself. It does not need to calculate its own worth. It does not need to compete with wealth or power or wonders built to impress. It only needs to be offered, freely and without hesitation, and sometimes, in the right moment, in front of the right person. That alone proves stronger than anything an empire could ever build. Humanity did not win its place among the great powers of this galaxy through strength of arms or wealth of resources. We earned it through a small wooden bird, carved by a grandfather who never imagined his gift would one day change the fate of an entire species, and through the simple, terrifying decision to bring something true into a room where nothing true had been offered in 1,000 years. That, I have come to understand, is the quiet strength every civilization eventually forgets, buried beneath layers of calculation and strategy, until someone new arrives to remind them what honesty actually looks like. And on that day, in that chamber, it was humanity who remembered first.